Alkarenn is the second player in the row we are covering from the quietly productive Kazakh scene. The second AWPer in a row too. Now, whilst he does have those similarities about the previous prospect, his path to this sort of infamy, this recognition, this acknowledgement is quite different. He starts off in a very obscure cube roster and then very quickly gets plucked into the Spirit Academy system. He's now obviously making his way onto Heroic, at least on loan, but the primary focus of our attention will be this period on Spirit Academy. This Spirit Academy is one that's been incredibly productive and successful over the last sort of 12 months. They've won a couple of small LANs put on by BetBoom. They've also won a few CCT events. They've generally been a very successful low-level team, despite also being an academy. Alkarenn was not the most famous name on this roster. We all know exactly who actually was, but his role as the AWPer makes him quite significant to understanding how the team played, and also makes it interesting to see how he fit into this roster and what skills he has to bring along into the next level. Of course, I'll be the one covering this because, as with most players who go through these academies who are not the big name, most people have overlooked him. In fact, most of this roster, you could make a case for being completely overlooked, though Alkarenn on the AWP, despite the significance of that role and despite some of his pretty impressive LAN stats, has been all but ignored. So let's dive into these demos together and see exactly what we can expose about this uncovered sniper. Now, if you want the ability to vote on who becomes the next full official public prospect, and you want access to the other mini prospect episodes I've been doing just for members, as well as all the VODs, and to support the channel, please consider becoming a member today. It's the best way to support the channel, and I'm always trying to put out new videos like these for the members to enjoy. Alkarenn is a far more potent individual than you'd expect from his numbers. Yes, his rating and KPR don't exactly leap off the page, I know. Let's examine them. Now, he has a style that's becoming more prevalent in young AWPers, or at least I feel like I'm noticing it more. This is a style where a player doesn't necessarily track particularly well, not heavy on the pre-aim side, but has an incredibly quick flick, and sometimes can hit the most insane shots that really are round-breaking and should be theoretically impossible. Now, to understand the impact of this, we'll start with the pistols. His pistol rounds vary quite heavily. Obviously, some are absolute tragedies, whilst others are actually somewhat mind-blowing. The dichotomy between those two extremes sort of works better on the CT side, with a pistol that more naturally requires flicks to the head, less interested in constant tracking, spamming, as you would with a Glock. But on the T side, in order to try and make use of this, he has given the Hero P250 quite a lot. And statistically, it hasn't really worked out that much. But when it does work, he's picking up frags in bunches, and that's why I think Spirit Academy keep taking this risk. Now, his iconic weapon is the Big Green, and he is an incredible combat AWPer, able to make those difficult close to medium range shots with incredible speed. This is where we see the most benefit of his flick-heavy aiming style, as the corrections required by combat AWPer are usually immediate and very big. They're large adjustments across wide expanses of the screen. He can make it happen quite well. In this sort of quick-scoping chaos, Alkarenn can turn the tides of rounds when the game plan goes wrong. And that's quite important, because the majority of the shots he will take will not be these combat shots. He's going to be lining up for picks, he's going to be taking those more steady sort of heads-up duels, and there we do see some discomfort, where he can overflick, he can react a little too extremely. So there are drawbacks, even on the AWP. But what I can say that's more positive about this is actually it seemed to be less of a problem on LAN. The LAN demos, he's able to hit the easier shot with more consistency, so I'm mixed on how exactly his aiming style impacts his AWP. Rifling is a bit of a mixed bag, although overall it is effective. His reaction speed and ability to snap his crosshair into the correct vicinity almost instantly makes him really great on the cleanup. Whilst I wouldn't say his spray control's a real weapon, it is good enough to just complement the rest of this play. You know, if he needs to take out 2 or 3 low health targets, he's going to be adjusting very quickly between them. It's generally not going to require the most precise spray. Statistically, his rifle play is really positive if you look into some of the deeper numbers. When you compare him to other AWPers playing similar roles, similar positions, a similar frequency of rifling, his rating, his ADR, his KPR just about outperforms them. This is one of the many aspects of his play that got better on low ping, so Alkarenn does have certain strengths that translate quite well to more intense and higher pressure competition. Alkarenn's CT sides are defined by very standardized picks, which you can find in almost any AWPer's demo to any level. My assumption on why we don't see more creative and risky picks is due to the man in all of the headlines. Kyosuke was the focal point for this team. He was the one being set up for success. He was the one who would win maps almost single-handedly. There was no reason to throw away lives on less guaranteed fights. Still, I like my AWPers to be willing and able to assert themselves, and as I often say, I can't give a player credit for something I never saw. His CT side opening rate for 2025 sits at 22.1%, dropping to a flat 20 in full buy rounds. Considering his relatively high death rate in these opening fights, about 40% of his attempts are actually opening deaths, it has to be said that Alkaren's demos leave a lot to be desired on the openings front. On the majority of maps, there are a few more interesting locations Alkarenn will try to take a risk on, make a little push, a little play, places where he does express a little bit more individuality, although let's not go too overboard. They're not that crazy. On train, he likes to take a line into Long Dog from Electric, something that seems a bit wild to me. The next landmark to retreat to is quite detached and cover is minimal. This angle relies heavily on the element of surprise, and the rifler playing towards Ivy being able to cover a hasty retreat or spot out a lurk coming from main. Nuke, he's fond of ramp and outside pushes, which is certainly a little flash of flair to the defense, but these are not really successful plays for him. The additional risks do not reap much reward, as he does take a noticeable dip in opening KD on Nuke itself. We have few notable examples on his best maps, as he plays Dust 2 and Mirage fairly straight up. He'll throw in an upper tons push on occasion, but it's not exactly like he's mixing it up Torgy style with any regularity. In that sense, Alkarenn isn't a thrilling demo to watch. It's not exactly some positional, calculated, risk-managed masterclass. Now, as I've said before, his shot making, when things break down, when he needs to get himself out of a sticky scenario, really is the way he impacts the game. But on top of that, he actually has a really strong scout, which, given his aim style, makes sense. And of course, his M4, fairly performant in those big rounds when he actually does pull it out. Now, the T side does see the customary dip that we expect from all AWPers, Alkarenn being no exception. His AWP usage remains quite high, thankfully, though the overall fragging figures are not spectacular. His playstyle has the same quirks as in the defensive end, well, should I say lack thereof. The picks he takes are typically very standard, varying minimally from the expected lines an AWPer should, could, is recommended to hold. This style sometimes works incredibly, with Dust 2 being the clear standout. Alkarenn really knows what he's doing around the mid doors, holding lines patiently, and reacting swiftly to openings in the smokes. It's a map where AWPers can stay on the big green without any real drawbacks, so it makes sense that such a scope expert would be right at home. The AWP is responsible for almost 69% of his kills on the Dust 2 T side, and over 2/3 of his total multi-kills. His late game also feels like it's at its best on the Dust 2 T side, as he's able to close out rounds time and time again. This, along with his better success rate on opening picks, shows how Alkarenn can thrive in his playstyle if he's feeling comfortable, and that playstyle in itself is quite minimalist. Sure, in the clutch he can play a little more fast and loose, use that quick twitch reaction speed to great effectiveness, but he's generally out of the way and quite stable. What I'm addressing here really, directly, indirectly, is the heroic transfer. Now, I do personally believe, from the demos I've watched, from what I've seen, that Grix is probably the superior individual in all the ways we consider impressive. But in terms of being the right individual for the team, in terms of what Heroic want, considering they want to play with multiple, more aggressive, more mobile riflers, it might make sense for them to actually play with a player who loves to be simple, out of the way, and minimalist. It doesn't make for particularly thrilling viewing, but given what Alkarenn brings to the table, it might make him the perfect teammate for exactly these players. Now, whilst Dust 2 might be an exceptional map, and there's a couple others where he may outperform the average AWPer just in terms of his ratings, he struggles to get numbers up in a more impressive or dominant fashion. This comes back to how involved he is with the play, as well as his shooting style. There are a few kills to be found in the early stages. Between his inconsistent pistols and some of the conversions, he's just not going to be regularly stacking up those stats. He throws a lot of flashes that are required for the team to take space and win duels, and his .12 flash assists per round being reflective of the usefulness of his efforts. These are not wasted flashbangs. That's a really high rate, a pretty impressive success rate for any team and any player. So there is something to be said for the effectiveness of his support AWPing, even if I find the concept rather repulsive. On the T side, the portrait that the demos are painting is that of the doomed support system AWPer, a player who is locked within certain responsibilities, unable to be as flary, as exciting as they could, but who ultimately provides value to his team, who'd rather he just stayed alive and allowed the riflers to thrive. This could be his way into tier 1, it could allow him to establish himself and get him those next level contracts, but it's not going to make him a fan favorite anytime soon. Of course, that'll probably change very swiftly if Heroic start winning. The grading for Alkarenn is unfortunately not very flattering. It's quite clear that on this Spirit Academy roster, he's not been the driving force for their success. Mechanically, Alkarenn is a strong flicker who struggles for consistency across the board. He gets credit for this general explosiveness. You'll see a lot of value brought out in terms of things like the scout kills, some of these pistol round highlights, those combat AWP flicks, but the control factors for me really aren't there, so I can't be anywhere near as generous on that side. His playstyle overall is quite passive, not really pushing the boat out anywhere, not going for any sort of mid-round peaks, big re-peaks. When he does get into those sorts of chaotic situations that I've mentioned a few times, there he will tend to be quite bold, but those are very much last hurrahs, last stands, big Hail Marys, not really the defining factors of his playstyle. Now, AWPs are quite hard to chart on my graphic here, so I'm not going to bother putting him on. But I am going to say that he is, more on the passive side. Finally, his current level isn't seemingly that high. His playstyle is maybe a reflection of what he's been asked to do, but as I've said, I can't give you credit for what I haven't seen. Now, what he does may translate pretty well into specific teams at the next level, but that's not really what I want to see in potential. Potential for me is about what they can be as a star on a team, as the feature, the focus. And for that, I'm not really sure I can place him too highly either. Now, I do think he can be a piece on a roster with really strong rifle play, who may even make playoffs at tier 1 events. That's not absurd to me. I've seen AWPers who have aesthetically looked worse than this reach far greater heights than I ever expected, but it still doesn't make them the greatest AWPers I've ever watched. I don't think Alkarenn will be the reason outright that a team like, say, Heroic goes on to win events, but I don't think he'll be a big problem either. His style is safe, his style is secure, he won't throw the rounds. I just wish he would win more. Alright, if you enjoyed, leave a like, leave a comment to me your thoughts on Alkarenn, especially this move to Heroic. I'll be curious to find out what takes we have out there in the general public. Remember that becoming a member is the best way to support the channel and get access to way more content. And I'll see you next time. Goodbye.